Warframe has a ton of weapons to add to your arsenal, but as a collector, I can say that isn't enough. So why not add to the absolute craziness of the unique weaponry in the game? I want both new and unique, old and stolen type weapons added to this game. Now, I do not expect or even want the developers to do this because it is a lot of work, and these may be some stupid ideas. But that is why I am here, to be stupid and creative. I'm going to create 3 weapons based on household items or anything you can find in your house. So if you think any of these ideas are good, or maybe even bad, let me know. And if you think I should add anything to these weapons, let me know also. Maybe in the future I can come back to them and update it. So with that being said, let's begin. The first item we have is the baseball bat, obviously, of course, because we can't do one of these without eventually having the baseball bat at some point. But this does make just a little bit of sense. Warframe should have baseball somewhere, although I don't think there's actually any sports in the main Warframe universe, like at all. But at least I know that there is some in the Warframe 1999 universe because it's in 1999. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense, or some sense at least. So this will obviously be a two-handed melee weapon, with a classic swing as its basic attack, and for the heavy attack it would just be an over-the-head skull bash. However, I am thinking that this could be considered a new melee weapon type. Since you have swords, daggers, warpans, and hammers, it would be interesting to have bats as a new type. It would also be even cooler to have some new stance mods for them. And like I said earlier, it would make a whole lot of sense because we can go to 1999, so that could just be another little expansion onto that. Now the stats would be simple. Attack speed would be medium range, damage medium range to high range, and crit stats would be whatever is considered medium range for that. The baseball bat would also be comparable to the in-between for the stats of either a bow staff or a sledgehammer, just kind of in between that if that helps at all. Which makes it have a little more impact than other weapons for its damage type. Impact is pretty much all this weapon has, so we gotta give it a little more of course. Even though it does get more impact damage from the gimmick, which also adds even more, as you will learn in 1 second. Which I think this gimmick is quite cool. The gimmick is that when an enemy is killed, its body is sent flying. This isn't as much useful as it is funny, although when the enemy's body is flung, it could even do a bit of damage to other enemies in its path, and depending on how far the body goes, the impact damage increases. It's all because, it's a baseball bat, so you really need to be able to hit home runs, or at least for this version of the baseball bat you do. Because there is also multiple versions of these ideas. Essentially, there would be at least 4 other variants at the start, one being the classic wooden baseball bat that we were just talking about. And thinking about it though, would this really be a good weapon? Because you wouldn't expect this thing to last that long realistically in a fight. It would just break. But anyway, you would then have a bad boy metal bat that would destroy some guys with a slight increase in impact damage. And because Walking Dead made this so popular, we would also have one with barbed wire that would gain a little bit of extra slash damage with a slight decrease on impact damage. It would also make sense to have one that is electrical barbed wire as well for, that electrical damage. It would have less slash and impact than the normal barbed wire one would, but it is enough change to be on its own. So that's the baseball bat, the first weapon out of the 3 today, and I could legitimately see something like this coming into the game more as a gag weapon, even though, it still could be pretty good if built right, but I doubt that would happen, and I don't really want them to do this unless they do, which would be weird. But anyway, if you think this is good, honestly, you should just wait until the next 2. So next we have a whisk, and yes, I am talking about the little thing you use to mix things up to a good consistency, I think. I don't really know. I don't cook often, and when I do cook, I certainly don't use a whisk. But this is the next weapon, and honestly, it is rather unique. This, of course, is another melee weapon. However, it is only a one-handed melee weapon, or pretty much just a dagger. The normal attack is just your average swing with a light jab. As for the heavy attack, which is pretty much the same thing anyone would do if they really had a whisk to use as a weapon, which is just one big slap with a whisk. Anyway, with the Whisk being a small weapon, the damage would be quite low. However, its fast attack speed makes up for it a lot, along with the high crit chance, because who would expect to be hit by a damn Whisk? So by catching the enemies off guard, you get more crits, obviously. However, the critical damage would also just be low because, it's still a Whisk, but luckily it's not all about the stats. The Whisk will have no specific damage type, mainly because it's hard to give it impact, just because Whisks are usually flimsy. Plus, if you've ever been hit by a Whisk, it doesn't hurt. It really doesn't. Trust me. However, some could argue that it can get hot while cooking, so it should, have a heat element, but those people who argue that both don't exist and are dumb. Sorry if you're dumb. Heat runs out super fast, so that honestly wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense, and we have to make sense in a video game, of course. However, heat isn't completely off the table, as we will talk about that a bit later. So on to the gimmick. This is where it gets a lot more interesting. When wielding the Whisk, there is a small chance to confuse enemies every few seconds. It isn't the biggest chance, being it happens to every enemy around you every few seconds. Essentially, confusing enemies will just stun them for a little while, preventing them from attacking. The reason behind this is because it would confuse anyone. I am sure it would confuse anyone if someone just ran up, was bullet jumping to their friend, and killed them with the damn Whisk. So yeah, I feel like this makes just a crap ton of sense. Now, for the variants, there isn't many possible, I should say. There's just not a lot of variants possible for this because I really don't know a lot of different types of Whisk. So, of course, I've thought of some bland ideas. One could be a set of dual Whisks, which I feel like is self-explanatory. Just two Whisks where you have two Whisks in your hand, but this would give a double the chance to confuse enemies, just like the normal Whisk would, but of course double the chance. The other one will bring back the discussion of heat on a Whisk. It would be a 1000 degree Whisk, the variant with a mission to bring back a dead trend, or at least a very niche trend that a few people like. It is still really satisfying though. But that would of course have heat damage, a rather good amount to be exact. And the 1000 degree Whisk will also not confuse enemies as often because, a lonely Grenier will see that shiny red and kind of crap his pants. Probably. And that's it for the Whisk. I genuinely both hate and love this idea. I love the idea of using the Whisk as a damn weapon, and I love the gimmick idea behind this. But god, do I hate how stupid this idea sounds. I wouldn't even fight a damn squirrel with a Whisk, let alone a Grenier. So yeah, don't ask me how I thought about this because honestly, I really don't know. But anyway, on to the last and my favorite of all these ideas. For the last weapon, we got dice. Just a simple set of dice, nothing special here. So how the hell can some dice be a damn weapon? And honestly, that is a really good question. But I have a really good idea to back that up on how this could work, which just so happens to be my favorite idea. So I imagine this to be similar to kunais. Throw the weapon and you don't have to reload, meaning this would just fit right into the kunai category for mods and achievement type things. And if it's not obvious, it would simply be a secondary. As for the stats, you would think that the dice have low damage with how small they are, and with that, you are correct. However, what makes up for that low base damage is the explosion it causes and the fast attack speed. So overall, it would give about a medium attack damage range. On top of that, the crit chance would be completely random since dice are quite random, but we'll get on about that a little bit later. As for the damage type, of course I've mentioned that there's explosions, and because of the explosion that they cause, the dice will of course do additional blast damage on impact with that enemy, both doing AoE damage and even knockback depending on the size of the explosion, which you will also hear about shortly because all of this stuff that I'm talking about has something to do with the gimmick, which is that the dice explodes on impact, which I kind of just already told you, and it kind of makes sense. I don't know. So what I didn't fully mention was that the explosion does have 6 different sizes, one for each side of the dice, which is randomly picked at each hit. On top of that, it will also have multi-shot already because you will be able to throw 3 dice at a time. Also, like I said, the critical chance is random, which is a new thing for this weapon. It'll range in between different percentages, but nothing too crazy. I could make nearly every stat random if I wanted to as well, but in the long run it would only make for a fun weapon, but not really a good weapon in my eyes, so that's why I just went with the critical chance being the only random one. And if you still don't get it, the gist of this weapon is that dice can have random outcomes, so why not make all of this even more random, but just random enough to at least make a playable weapon. As for variants for the basic dice, I feel like there could be quite a few other themed dice. One being, of course, for Kome. It would make a crap ton of sense to have a set for her, especially since she doesn't have a secondary. Her dice would also probably give many different random buffs when using them instead of the one random crit chance. Next could be D&D themed, with more range on the crit chance and explosion sizes. Probably going up to around 20 different explosion sizes because of D20s. It could also buff or debuff the player based on the roll, similar to Kome's dice, but the debuffs could be really bad considering that debuffs could make or break a D&D run, I think. I guess. I'm not sure. Then how about sharp dice? Let's bring triangular dice into the mix and lose the explosion, but keep the random stats with slight increases to those stats. Along with that, it would have a puncture damage type that can increase and decrease with each hit, making that stat random, of course. Lastly, I think a set of elemental dice could be really freaking cool. This would be a little more random than the others, considering it would give a random damage type along with the normal dice gimmick. Of course, it wouldn't explode, obviously, but it would just give a random damage type, like I said, and I feel like this would probably be a lot more fun than it would be useful, but who knows? I don't know how these things could be built, and it could just be like really freaking useful. You never know. So that's everything with the dice. This is by far my favorite one out of the three, not only because of the gimmick, but also because of the variants. This weapon was inspired by me looking at my shelf and seeing a set of dice. So yeah, I don't know why I have dice on my shelf, but it's there, and it helped me come up with this masterpiece, so I'm quite glad with that. So that is a few ideas of weapons that will probably never show up in Warframe, but it's fun to think about it. So I hope you enjoyed. I will probably keep these ideas somewhere, so if you have any ideas as to what I should do next or what I should change or add to any of these three weapons, let me know. I will probably write it down, make some adjustments as need be, and we could probably return to it. And I'm always open to ideas, and I will definitely have to do more of these because I have tons of ideas that could really be interesting. Just think, what if other video game weapons were in Warframe? I don't know. So with that being said, thanks for watching, like, subscribe, I don't care as usual, and I guess I'll just see you in the next video.